I asked a very specific thing of Terry, who's been a long time veteran of science communication at the university level, but he also knows a lot and has seen a lot of us come and go in the federal government. And it seems, I think, as I talk with him, that it always gets set to zero whenever there's a new person coming in. There's a new, all these people really, really want to get to know you, and then 6 months later they're gone. So I think I asked Terry to come and tell us a little bit about where we're hitting the mark, if we are, where we're missing the mark, and we are, and a little chance for us to think and give a little bit of conversation about our respective shops in the various agencies that we're represented here. So Terry, if you want to cue us up, that would be great.
Okay, I'll do my best. Kevin, is this on? Or do we need to
No.
hold on for that? Now it's on? Yes, there we go.
Okay.
He can figure it out. I can.
No, we have an engineering college. Again, thank you, Rick, and thanks again for organizing this. This is a pretty daunting panel to moderate, and I'm going to do my best to keep myself and my institution out of trouble and do a good job. I will first do a quick introduction of the panelists. To my left is John Berklow, who is Director of the Office of Communication and Public Liaison at the National Institute of Health. So I'm sure he was paying close attention when I was talking out of school. And will forgive me. And to his left is Aya Collins, who is the lead public affairs and media relations manager for the National Science Foundation. And Rick, we all know, who just left. And, Gail Porter, who's she directs public affairs at the National Institute of Science and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I can write it correctly. And she's also been a good friend for a long time. And so I think I'm just gonna kick things off by saying, kind of echoing what Rick says, that some of us have been around for a very long time, and we get it, we understand the value of our relationships with the various federal agencies. They are critically important to us, and not just to us as communicators, but clearly to us as an institution. At the University of Wisconsin, we have a magnificent research portfolio. We spend $1.1 billion a year, and in Washington numbers, that's pretty small. But for those of us in the upper Midwest, that's a significant amount of money. And about, I'd say, between $600 and $700 million of that comes from the federal agencies. So that's our lifeblood. And if our investigators who work their tails off to get funded have a harder time getting access to the funds that they need to do the important work that they're doing, it's not good for the country, it's not good for our university or our universities. It's imperative that those of us who are communicators in these environments really understand and appreciate that. And having been around for so long, I'm in the unenviable position of being almost, the institutional memory at the University of Wisconsin. So if people want to know something, including our government relations people, if they want to know something or if they want to know someone who to talk to, we're the people that they come to see. I was busy the last day and a half trying to come up with information about Zika research that's ongoing on our campus, so that it could be help inform a congressional hearing. Fortunately, we have very friendly Congress folk in our area. Our U.S. senator, in fact, grew up playing on the floor of one of our labs in the Enzyme Research Institute on our campus. And so we have a good friend and supporter there. And so we're constantly doing this. We're trying not to let things interfere with talking about the science, which is really what's important, and getting those messages out there, because that's where the rubber meets the road for those of us who communicate about science. But if you're communicating about it in the back of your head, you have to understand how important these relationships are, and work hard to foster them. So I'm gonna shut up now and turn the mic over, and hopefully we'll get a lot more money from you guys.
Okay.
Thanks,
We'll
Terry.
get a lot more money to give.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting us here today. Rick asked me to give you a little bit of an overview of NIH and communications there, and then some of the things we've done to try to spread the word and also let people know about the connection between NIH and our grantees. You probably know NIH already, but it's the primary agency for biomedical research in the country. We hope if the president's budget works out, we get $33 billion in 2017, but we're roughly around $30 billion. And I know it's probably hard for some of you to hear our director, Francis Collins, complain about our paltry budget of $30 billion, but it's all relative. It puts it in perspective. Anyway, just to let you know, we're made up of 27 institutes and centers, everything from the National Cancer Institute at $5 billion alone, all the way down to some of the smaller ones. And each one has its own communications office and communications director. And so I think we're sometimes an impenetrable institution to deal with. When you're trying to figure out who you talk to about what. Also, that we, out of that budget, about 85% goes to approximately 2,500 grantee institutions around the country and around the world. So there are quite a few people trying to explain their research, and the challenge for me is to try to make the connections again. A few years back, Dr. Collins came to me and said, I'm so tired of everybody telling me nobody knows NIH, especially members of Congress when we testify. They'd say, Dr. Collins, NIH is the best kept secret in Washington. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I'm really doing a good job here as the head of communications. So we looked at what could we do. Well, one thing, we had about 600 logos being used across NIH with no connection to any particular identity. And so we did the impossible and got everybody to use one mark, NIH, and use text for their institute, which I said couldn't be done, thank goodness. And even the National Cancer Institute has come along. Another country heard from has decided to use the logo as well. And two, again, the 85% of the money goes out. How can they acknowledge NIH? So one thing, we weren't clear in our guidance, and Rick was part of a group a few years back where we put together clear guidance for grantees on how to acknowledge and communicate that they receive funding, either at the start of the grant or at the results. And so if you go up, if you can type in NIH acknowledgement, you can get it on our Office of Extramural Research page. And also we have a Public Information Officer, a PIO network site. And that brings me to the next thing, is we established a PIO network. And we have about 430 members there now. And I would admit that it was pretty anemic for a few years. And the last couple of years we've had Kristen Sandoval take over. And I don't know if you've interacted with Kristen, but she's very engaged, and she's done a lot of new and interesting things. And we're trying to take a different approach, rather than do this, do that, and this is what you're supposed to do, and you're getting money from us. We're trying to say, how can we be helpful to you? How can you be helpful to us? How can we interact and also stay in touch? One of the specific things we do is when our director blogs, which he does every Tuesday and Thursday, blogs on Tuesdays about full science, and Thursdays usually have fun images. If he uses research that's been done in one of our grantee institutions, we send that to Vice President of Communications and PIO, and let them know about that, and quite often they repost. And so, again, it's just something rather than just feeling like NIH is telling you what to do. Also, we have the page I mentioned, the PIO network page. It explains how to interact with NIH. There are some resources, contact information, news and events. And so if there's a key personnel change at NIH, we try to let people know. So anyway, we are trying to do a number of things, and again, make it more collegial than dictatorial. So if you're interested, Kristen Sandoval is on. She's the key contact. However, you may decide to work with one of our individual institutes and centers, and also everything. We're trying to make sure that we're making your life easier and you're helping us. Thanks.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aya Collins, and I'm with the National Science Foundation. I'm their lead for public affairs and media relations, so it's great to be here. I'm actually on day number 11 with the foundation. So go easy on me as I'm learning a lot about the great work that NSF does. I came from Health and Human Services in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, and really looking forward to the work that I'm going to be doing with the foundation. So a few of the messages that I wanted to bring forward that our Director Porterville wanted to convey is that we are really looking to improve communications with our universities and bring forward all of the great work and establish deeper and richer networks with PIOs. A couple of the things that we are going to be doing, and one of the things that I am looking forward to implementing, is creating kind of what you talked about as a PIO network or a database. How many people use CRMs or customer relationship management systems in the room? Great. So that's something that we're looking to do to really reach deeper. One of the things that we found, and even in my short time with the foundation, is a lot of the institutional knowledge. And once someone leaves, that Excel sheet leaves with them. As far as the PIOs that they're close with in those relationships. So really galvanizing all that information, putting it into one place so that we can have far-reaching impact far after folks have left. And also one of the things that the public affairs officers we have, as you know, 7 directorates within NSF. And we have a team of 12 public affairs specialists within my group. And so we're all broken up. The team has specific directorates assigned to them. So one of their key functions is making sure they communicate across many different universities and colleges and keeping in touch with those PIOs. Some of my goals are making sure that we communicate even beyond just the program officers and the PIOs, but also staying in communication with university communications staff, the senior leadership, and really establishing that relationship with them. One of the things I was happy to see is NSF is very transparent, and we put all of the names of the public affairs team and our phone numbers, which is very interesting for government. HHS, we didn't do that, but my phone rings, which is great, and we get to hear the community, from the community. So please feel free to use those resources on our website to contact our staff. Anyone is able to contact me directly. Aya Collins, a.collins@nsf.gov, to get more information about the great work that we're doing. Let's see, what else could I share? What else would you all like to know?
Well,
I think one of the things that Rick mentioned was having these networks, having these established lines of communication is really important. And the turnover in the agencies, the turnover at universities really works against that. There was a time when I spent a fair amount of time working with NSF, including organizing and hosting a meeting that was held out in Socorro, New Mexico, with a whole bunch of science press officers from around the country. So, in an effort to foster that kind of working relationship. And it really, from the university press officer perspective, it ebbs and flows. And it can be very difficult to establish and maintain those networks, because the only opportunities we have are usually at meetings like I'm in town actually for the AAAS meeting. The National Association of Science Writers is the other place where people like me gather. And so it can be very labor intensive to get those things up and running and keep them well maintained. And so what you're talking about in terms of sort of institutionalizing those relationships would be very valuable. I think it becomes important too, not just in terms of the good news that we have to talk about, but also we have different kinds of relationships with the agencies. Some of the agencies that fund our research are also regulators, and we sometimes have different interactions with them. For example, in uncomfortable situations where there may be research misconduct or something like that. So those kinds of things would be valuable.
Great, thank you for that. Along those lines, I think, just to reiterate what you were saying as far as making sure that we maintain those relationships and the transparency piece. Some of the approaches in my background in PR, marketing, and branding, almost sending what I like to call a hot list. So when you're a new public affairs specialist, or say you're a new PIO, sending a really brief rundown of what are the priorities and key areas that you cover, what you care about. I would encourage all of you all, if you haven't created a hot list of areas, to send to your federal contacts, and for us to do that as well. I think it definitely goes both ways, for you to know what's on our top priority, what's on our editorial calendar for the year, and keeping consistent. Making sure that you put ticklers, even just, I know it sounds, like the littlest detail, but it really does make a difference even on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, because that way you know when the turnover has occurred versus waiting for 4 months and then you email and the email bounces back after your contact has already left a university or vice versa, the federal agency. So just trying to employ some of those strategies to continue the connectedness, to make sure we reach out and maintain transparency, and to do a good job. Director Cordova is definitely top of her mind of doing a better job communicating across the foundation and with the universities. It's such a vital piece of what we do. The majority of our funding goes out the door. So we are a very lean organization, so it's critical that we communicate out. So, thank you all.
So I'm Rick Porchal, surprise. And I finally get to talk a little bit about my agency. I have to say that the first thing that comes to my mind, not just necessarily about our agency, but about all of us up here, hearing the other comments and hearing sort of Terry's Q&A up here, is that for none of our federal agencies can we guarantee sustainability of a PIO network. We wish we could. It is by its nature always going to be a personality-driven thing, combined with a politically driven thing, combined with whoever's sitting in the director's office thing. So you heard that Frances Cordova was very excited about this. We heard from Cherry Murray this morning that she's very excited about reaching out to universities. I've heard Frances say it over and over and over again. I don't listen to this, so I have no idea what's going on. But I think that's the solution, right? And the reality is we would like to do this 24/7, 365 days a year for the rest of our natural lives, however long that might be. But there are institutional constraints, not the least of which is sometimes we change jobs. And when we change jobs, I have tried in my past jobs to be very forthright and very succession oriented and try and keep these things alive when I leave. And the reality is that if someone like me doesn't come up in that position again, that whole infrastructure is lost. And that happens more often than not, and I think that's happened to all of our agencies at one time or another, except for NIST, because Gail's been there since the fall of Rome. Right? Really, NIST has been, I can joke with Gail because she was my first boss outside the academic environment, and I know that she has been, it's been a consistent priority at NIST for a long time, but only because Gail has been there for a long time. It's been a consistent priority of NIH with some dips in the road because John's been there since 2000 something, right? And that's really very exciting, I's been there 2 weeks. I've been here 2 years. And so you're going to see a wide range of that. And I think one of the things we need to figure out is there a way we can be more sustainable? Is there a way that there can be several of us at any one time involved in this management of a PIO network, so that when one of us gets hit by a political bus, the others can keep on trundling down
I
the
have
road?
a short answer to that.
Yeah, sure.
Just about something.
Encourage your press officers to be professionally active. One of the reasons that I know Rick and Gail and a few other folks in the agencies is because they're at the meetings that I go to, and they are active in our professional organizations and societies.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I encourage that in my staff, and I think that's something that is not universally held within the federal agency infrastructure or landscape as something that's important to do, and it should be, no question. So in the Office of Science, I'm sort of thinking back along the things we talked about today that I wanted to bring to this conversation, and one is, the things that we think about are really three. One is audience, and you heard the conversation this morning that our audience is either just the Hill, or it's the general public, whatever that mythic thing happens to be, or something in the middle. And I have to say that we have a very narrow view of where we're hoping you will help us communicate. And that very narrow view is about 9,000 people. Those 9,000 people, if you looked at all the members of the National Academy of Sciences and all the research deans and all the people who testified before Congress on science issues, and everybody who's senior member of a professional society in science, and you eliminated the duplicates, you'd be at about 9,000 people. These are people who have regular interactions with members of Congress or their staffs. I wish we had regular interactions personally with members of Congress and their staffs. There are rules. We can't have that, or shouldn't have that. I wouldn't say can't. Shouldn't have that contact. And one of the things we struggle with is trying to find the people who do have that contact and be able to deliver up to them the kind of information they can use to take our case forward to members of Congress and their staffs. So that's really our sweet spot. It's those 9,000 people, and we're very dedicated to trying to reach those 9,000 people with the great news coming out of our research partners and out of our funded research. That's what we try to do, and that's a little different from what Marissa was saying. She's really trying to reach people who don't know about DOE, and that's great. That's not our mission. Our mission is what she's calling the invested stakeholders, or the potentially invested stakeholders, and that's, I think, an important thing for us to think about in this context. The second thing is about the platform, and we made a decision when I came on board 2.5 years ago that for each and every one of us to try to pull the same set of eyes to each and every one of our websites was just ludicrous. That we had to be reaching people where they already are, and that this business of trying very hard to pull people onto our sites was really not going to get us much more than heartache and a bad report every time we went every month to see our director and said, well, once again, we only have X number of people who came to our website and looked at us. When in fact, we should be delighted. I think we should bend down and kiss the ground anytime anyone looks at any of our federal websites, because it's such a hard draw. It's a really, really hard thing to do, and we should try to be finding places where they really do go. Much less, trying to compete with all the university websites and all the professional society websites. We need to find some way of providing that not one-stop shop of information and providing where people actually are already going. And I was going to give a shout out to Jessica Johnson, but I think she's left for the day with this, which is part of our major stakeholder outreach is with Newswise and with Eurekalert. Jessica's at Newswise, and Eurekalert, as you know, is completely overwhelmed with the AAAS meeting at the moment, so they weren't able to come today. But we have partnerships with both of them. When you publish something on Eurekalert and it mentions DOE, it gets exported into our portal so that we get to show the wide variety of work that we're doing. If you don't have subscriptions to Newswise or you don't have subscriptions to Eurekalert, let us know, because we can help you get that information up within reason. We're not going to undercut their business model, but we really are interested in doing that. And one of the things that I would refer back to that is we worked out a special deal with Eurekalert that we're the only agency that's allowed to post features in addition to all their other kinds of material that, Eureka is pretty anal about what they allow on the site. I want to say it. And they allow us to be much more flexible because we have a contract with them for a portal. And those features, many of which Kate has helped prime the pump for, those features are more popular than the news releases that are the stock and trade of Eureka. 3 times more popular than the stock and trade of Eureka. So that's a really important thing for us. And the last thing I would say, one other thing I would say about that is, even though we have very low readership on our website, to a principal investigator at a university, they can be assured that their program officer at DOE is reading that. And that's sometimes the only person who matters to them. And that's a really important give that we can give to the university community, is making sure that your PI is being regularly seen as delivering good news to the Department of Energy on their website. The last thing is about message. I know we've talked about it a little bit, and I like the idea of making sure that the message about federal sponsorship is the deck, or it's boilerplate, or something else, but I keep thinking to myself, even though I hear folks say, well, it really doesn't matter to anybody who paid for this. Nobody really cares. I think as good writers, we have to be able to find narrative ways to make people care. We need to go beyond boilerplates into making our stories reflect the need to be able to sustain a competitive environment, competitive economic environment based on innovation and discovery. And that's really where we are. If we can't get beyond the boilerplate, I think we're going to be marginalized. And we'll have this conversation next year, and we'll have this conversation the year after that, and we'll have this conversation the next time AAAS comes to Washington. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Kate.
Hi, I'm Gail Porter from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. How many people have heard of the National Institute of Standards and Technology? Wow, we're making progress. Because I beg to differ. You are not the best kept secret in Washington. We are the best kept secret in Washington. I will go to that on that one. So we are your nation's measurement experts. We are Nobel Prizes. We are great stuff, but we are a small agency compared to Big Daddy here. We only have 1 little billion. Just Terry and I are equal over here on the 2 ends. Because we have about $1 billion budget, but we do every topic under the sun, which is why it's such a fascinating place. So if you're an excellent science writer, I might want to hire you someday. Just think about it. Anyway. So what we do, I think, is because NIST is smaller and because of our mission is to help industry. But we help industry with a lot of university partners. And we've been a major collaborator in the federal government for about 100 years that we've been around. That's what we do, we collaborate. And so the way we collaborate, because we're smaller, because we don't have big bucks to give you, we collaborate by carrots, not sticks. We don't require anything of you, except if you want to work with us. And then we try to set up reciprocal relationships where if somebody like Georgia Tech is doing great stuff with us in graphene research, and they have fantastic, brilliant postdocs who are working in our lab with us, then we talk to them, and John Toon and others at Georgia Tech, who I know from the National Association of Science Writers, when I go to professional meetings, and then they tweet us, we tweet them, we put on their Facebook page, they put on our Facebook page. We have a very give and take, free-flowing social media profile, and actually social media is my best thing we're doing right now. We are writing fewer and fewer press releases. We're writing more blogs from scientists with their voice. And then we're also asking for guest bloggers when they come and use our user facilities. And this is something we're relatively new at, so I'm not pretending we come to market at all. But you're asking me to say what we're doing to collaborate. So our newest things we're doing is we're doing guest blogs from people who have used our user facilities. What did you get? Why did you come here? What did you learn there? Why is it better here than it would have been at your own institution? We want people to say it in their own voice because that's what people read now. People don't read news releases as much. They want natural, easy, breezy stuff to read. As someone said, when I'm in bed reading my Facebook page, I don't want to read a press release. I want to read something that's interesting and fun, that tells me something I don't know. So the way we would love to work with universities is by having your brilliant students come and work for us, which they do. Your graduate students from the University of Maryland, we have a ton of them, work in our Nano Center. Because we have a lot of guest researchers. We have as many guest researchers as we have NIST researchers in our buildings, in both campuses, in several campuses. We have like 18 places now that we're collaborating, including small centers of excellence in forensics and in genome studies and in our newest ones in disaster resilience. We got a ridiculous span of topics. So we can't have that list because our topics are so broad. And so my idea for that list is let's convince Eureka Alert to have that list. They're going to keep being here. The university people are going to change. The government people are going to change. Let's have somebody. I would love to convince AAAS to have that list.
They used to.
Well, they did. So let's convince them again. Maybe there's a way to fund it. You have money.
Good job.
Anyway, and my other big point, besides carrots are better than sticks, why do I cooperate, for example, with my parent company, my parent organization, the Department of Commerce? I want to give them my good news because they have more people than I do. I probably have more eyeballs than you do, unless you're University of Wisconsin. Unless you're a huge university, I probably have more eyeballs on my list Facebook page than you do. I might have more eyeballs on my YouTube page than you do. If you did work that was with our funding, or that you collaborated with us on, or if your guy was, or woman was at our lab doing that work, and you give me your video that's all produced and wonderful, I'll put it on my YouTube page. If it's accurate and it's good, I'll put it on my YouTube page. So as long as we meet certain standards, that's my favorite word, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. If the people who are submitting to us are meeting certain standards, it's not hyped, it's accurate, it's not editorializing, it uses attribution, it's basically brand journalism in a good way of what that those words mean, which is that you're imitating a good New York Times journalist. You're not promoting it, you're not hyping it, you're not fluffing it. It's substantive, it has quotes, it's real. If you can do those things for us, then we'll go ahead and put it on our pages. So those are our main ways, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, I guess I'm in charge here. So, any questions? Alberta?
I used to simply send a note to one of your people that I had a story coming out on such and such topic, and I would tell them what it was, what the grant was. You would do value-added stuff for my story. I would write the story. You would link to it for your webpage. Within the last 3 years, the only contact I've had is from your contractors who do Science 360. I've sent notes to people there. Don't get a response anymore. Even people I know, I don't get a response anymore, which leads me to believe, not that they hate me, although they may, that they have other priorities and that this is no longer a priority there, which is unfortunate because we were getting not just twice the amount out of it, but 10 times the amount. And it was really working for both universities and for NSF. So I would encourage that you look into talking to some of the people who were around when this was going on and see what was going on.
Thank you so much for that comment. I definitely hold near and dear to my heart the community that we serve. Without the universities and the colleges, that is the lifeblood of NSF. So I'm glad that I am coming in fresh and new. I'm not jaded by any prior system, and really am interested in, again, creating something that's going to last, an institutional mechanism that we can continue forward. So I definitely, you have my word and commitment to look into that. And definitely we can talk offline after the panel to talk about that. But I would encourage anyone, any anecdotes and anything like that from the field, please share that information with me. But it is definitely a commitment of Director Cordova and the rest of the team to improve the way that NSF does communications going forward. So thank you for that.
I just wanted to say that I mentioned Chris and Sandoval, but my email address and information is on the sheet too. Please never hesitate to call or email me as well.
Hello, this is Catherine Zandinella. I'm from Princeton University, and my question is for all of the representatives of the funding agencies here. I'm probably not alone in getting emails from my faculty members saying, my program officer would really like to see some news on this particular paper that I'm publishing. And a lot of us in science writing come from journalism or some kind of communications background. And so we're thinking a lot about our readers. We're thinking about the general public, and we're thinking that eventually the 9,000 people will get the message because it's going to come through the New York Times or it's going to come up through media to them. But I do think about these program officers, but the problem is that it's very easy for us to track how our stories do with the general readership and through media pickup and how things are reprinted, but knowing whether or not a program officer saw our press release is a black box. And so what I'm wondering is this an audience that we should be thinking about, and how do we know if our press releases or our stories have reached these people? You know, we're definitely tracking how the outside world sees our stories, but we're not actually tracking. Oh, and I always provide a report to my faculty members about how their story did, but they don't provide a report to me about how that story did with their funding officer. So I am just wondering if those of you from the federal agencies could give us some insight on who these people are and whether they're following our work.
So at NIH, there are quite a few of them, SROs or HSAs, different names for people who are working the program and interacting directly with the grantees. And I go around and give talks to them about the importance of communicating the research, and I encourage them to work with the scientists in the grantee institution and with their communications and our communications. So I try to link everybody up and also do it often enough to where this is standard practice now. This isn't an exception to the rule. Just keep that information and relationship going.
To provide a quick perspective from another university, it's not really a black box. You go back to the faculty member, and you know, this is part of the relationship that I have with my faculty. If they tell me that they have a program officer who's interested, I'm going to be interested. And if I can get a story in front of a program officer, I can declare victory and go home. And really, I love to see our stuff get out to much larger audiences. But those are really important audiences for us because they matter. The quality relationships that we want to foster.
So, one comment I want to make is that, as I said, we're a smaller place, so we have to use all the resources we have. And absolutely, I tell my writers, go back a month or two after you've written that story, talk to the person, ask them what impact it had on them. Sometimes we find out amazing things. Well, I started a whole new collaboration, and this person came, and then we invented this thing that I didn't know anything about, and now it's doing great guns. And we would never have known that if we didn't ask them. So you have to go back to your sources to find out. But the other issue is that I just lost my train of thought. Moments ago, I had a great point. Go ahead. Do another question. Sorry.
One of the and Kate could speak more eloquently to this than I can, but I'm up here and she's not. So one of the things we often hear when we put one of our stories from a research university that's done work with our funding on our homepage, we always go back to the press officer at the institution and we say, you know, our story's up here, thought you'd like to know. We copy the program officer, and we just the fact, even though they don't know that you know, some few thousands of people actually look at that page, they're only concerned that their program officer has seen that page. And we've had experiences, as Gail says, we've had experiences where a research vice president at a major research university initiated a Twitter account just to be able to retweet something that we put in our Twitter stream about one of their researchers, because that was so important to them. It's so, you know, it is so impactful for them to see their university's research featured on the homepage of one of their principal funders, even though it means little to the outside world, even though it's probably not our biggest entree into the mass world of mass media.
So my point was, don't let those PIs off the hook. Okay, communications is not something just for us. Communications is something the whole university, the whole federal government should be doing. So one of the principles I haven't missed that happens to work in my favor is that I try to take responsibility for broad audiences, because that's what public affairs generally does. We broadcast to wide audiences, and we try to tell the public how their federal money has been spent. But my PI, that's his audience. If he wants his program manager to read it, then he should send it to them. Why is that your job? That should be his job or her job. And besides which, Rick was talking about audiences. Okay, he cares about those 9,000 opinion leaders. We call them opinion leaders. They're very important to us as well. But I have segmented audiences. I have social media, which is science-interested people who care about what's being done with their federal money. And then we have those opinion leaders. I want my PIs to talk to those opinion leaders. They know who they are. They're going out to their communities. They're talking to them. Some of my guys are in disaster resilience. They're in San Francisco talking about earthquakes. They're talking directly to them. So stakeholder relations should not be just a PIO problem. It should be an institutional-wide, disseminated thing and decentralized incredibly, because you can make an incredible impact that way.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Tom O'Neill, and first off, I just wanted to raise 2 points for awareness. I am the co-chair of the DOE Web Council, and we do have wide representation across the department, so I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that there was a Web Council, and we do meet monthly. And we're definitely open to broadening and increasing that forum to better facilitate communication and cross-promotion. I do believe Marissa spoke earlier today, and she is our federal sponsor. And also want to let you know that we do have a internal wiki for all of DOE, in which we do have a point of contact list, and we're building a list of the different social media accounts that are used at the different labs and site offices, and I just did there. But just wanted to see, number one, if other organizations had a similar web council or internal wiki, and number two, you were talking about the audiences, going where the audiences are. And one place that I know the CDC has investigated and actually has a Wikipedia in residence is Wikipedia, and that's where a lot of audience and traffic has been coming from to their website from that particular source, and they're working on improving the content of that through a partnership with the San Francisco-based Wikipedia. So.
John, you could actually probably talk a little bit about your Wikipedia project.
Thanks. A number of years ago, we were finding that when we would try to change things, we were found so we were bounced out. And so they didn't know who we were. And so we invited a number of, who's from the Wikipedia Foundation, and Wikipedia, to come to a meeting at NIH. We all got to know each other, and seemed to change everything, and developed a much better relationship than we had one, I think, last year again. So, and to your other question, yes, we have the web office group, which is the same type of idea from all the 27 institutes and centers. We have a challenge that, again, we're very fragmented, but we also have an NIH presence, NIH homepage presence. So we're in constant collaboration, negotiation on how all that works.
Any more questions? Okay.
I have other questions, sorry to interrupt anybody, but I was thinking the other part of my job is crisis communications and dealing with, Terry mentioned, and research or other topics, or you may have some problems with a particular research for a number of reasons, and it bubbles up to NIH. Please feel free to call me. I'm very versed in all of this, and probably best to call me rather than Kristen, because I end up dealing with these types of things quite often, but I'm happy to talk it through.
Wonderful.
So I have a comment, if I could. It's sort of in the way of a question, back to the audience, and it stems from some things I heard in the elevator going up to one of our sites, and then in Dunkin' Donuts and Subway this morning, and I heard from several different people who didn't know who I was at that point, listening and lurking in the background. You know, it'll be a cold day in hell before I send a release to the agency for clearance, because they'll just screw it up.
And I wanted you to talk candidly about that because I think that's a perception, and I think that I wouldn't say it's just a perception either. I mean, I think it depends on where at the agency it goes. So I'd like to hear more about that.
I can say that I don't think I've ever submitted a news story or a news release for clearance or even prior.
Coordination, we call it here.
So, in my long and checkered career. And we do that for a number of reasons. One of the reasons that I'll state up front is that, well, the research is solicited and paid for through the agencies by the federal government, by our representatives in Congress. Once we get the money, the research is ours, and we take responsibility for it and its implications. And while anything sensitive, we're not gonna run off alone. We're gonna talk to people.
But even though you haven't sent it forward, Terry, how many times have you heard from PIs that, oh, I've shared this with my program officer and she wants to have this done. She wants to say this. Oh, I couldn't say that.
That doesn't
I
happen.
think there were
I don't really.
heads nodding in the audience.
I don't really mind if an investigator is sharing a story with their collaborators or the people who, or even somebody at the funding agency. That doesn't bother me. That's their relationship. Because when I go in and work with an investigator, I state very explicitly what our process is and how we work. And I guess I've been around for so long that they have confidence enough in our process that we're not going to screw it up, and that we are going to be good partners with the agencies and communicate what we need to communicate in an appropriate way ahead of time. And so, but I agree that. For those of us who write, our prose is precious, and the last thing we want to do is see it go down any kind of rabbit hole.
I agree completely with Terry, but there's another situation that comes up, and that's when there's actually somebody from the agency on the paper, when they're one of the researchers. I try to encourage my PIs not to tell them that they can change anything, and certainly tell them not to send it to the people above them. For one thing, I don't have time. I need that story to go out, and typically with government agencies that doesn't happen. I also have had things come back with multiple quotes from people who have absolutely nothing to do with the research except that they're administrators. And in one case with the Department of Agriculture, nobody's here, they wanted to take the actual content of the story out because they didn't like the results. So that's why we don't really want to, as you say, cooperate. You want to do a story, you want to take my story and do something with it, that's fine. But I'm going to put out my story with my university behind it, and we don't want to screw anything for us, so we're really careful about it. We're not going to put out a story that doesn't have content, though.
This is a question that Terry and I were talking about at lunch a little bit, and I had written down before I got here these things. If you want people to cooperate, then you have to understand both the incentives and the disincentives. And in our case, the disincentives are you'll slow me down, you'll change my message, you'll hijack my credit. Those are the three things that a university would think if a federal agency like mine, who might have funded your research, and we're doing more of that now. And I understand that, but because NIST is actually in the middle, we get money from DOE too. We get money from the FDA, we get money from EPA, we get money from all the federal agencies because we're specialists in our thing. So I get it from that point of view, I also get it from the university's point of view. So that's why we've come around to the idea that We do very few joint press releases, and we don't clear any press releases. In fact, I've convinced my own department not to clear my science press releases. Yes, thank you. And they did it because it's the right thing to do. I have, really good people at the Department of Commerce who are running public affairs. And we have a whole science integrity policy that says scientists are the experts on their topic, and scientists can talk on that topic. They can't talk on all topics. They can talk on the topic on which they're expert. So they can't talk about how well we got our snow shoveled at NIST, but they can talk about the specific research projects that have been peer-reviewed and published. And they should talk about that to the media. We should encourage them to do so. So my point of view on that whole thing is I don't really want to clear your press releases. I want you to go out and do those press releases. I want you to tell me about them, and you should tell me about them because I'll get you lots of eyeballs. Oh, but I do want you to do it in a responsible way. Don't overhype that research.
And I would say too that we had at our last summit, I had a really revelatory experience, and many of my staff did, and Ben and others who were listening. We invited in a troupe of 7 national science writers, ranging from Slate and NPR to science magazines and trades, and the question before them, they were ranged in age from a very young reporter to Joe Palca, who's not a very young reporter anymore. He's like my age. And we asked them what I had been taught as absolute dogma, which is don't send me 5 releases from 5 different institutions on the same topic because it'll get thrown in the trash. And to a person, they said that's a myth. That's old school thinking. You should not be trying to make your people all coordinate on one release because we'll only see it once and we'll understand you're trying to milk the message out of this. So let everybody send their own release to us. It functions like a virtual Facebook now. So that if I get 17 releases on one topic from 17 different institutions, that just tells me how important it is and that there's a lot of things going on. I would never in a million years have thought of that because that's so counterintuitive from what reporters used to tell us that it blew my mind. But I've since talked to dozens of reporters since then and said, yeah, that's right. And so while at some point when I first came in, I was all ready to say, we need to, one press release on this. Make all the labs do one press release. And I was like, and I even hear now from some of the labs, well, why shouldn't we be doing one press release? No. Let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Terrific. Are there any final questions before we thank our panelists for their time and indulgence this afternoon? I think this was a really great session. So thank you all very much.
So we are delighted. I was very excited this morning to have Kay Koizumi from the White House and Jerry Murray, our new director, to sort of open the conversation today a little bit about the importance of communicating university research and how we interact with that research through our laboratories, through our user facilities, through our direct support. And I have to say that we also, and when I was introducing our senior management this morning, including Jeff, I talked about how supportive the infrastructure at the senior management level in DOE was for our science communications portfolio from the secretary on down. And I'm delighted that we have Undersecretary Orr to come and talk with us this afternoon and sort of close out our conversation on sort of the perspective that he has from a broader remit and a broader portfolio than just the Office of Science. And it's a very important thing for us to be able to talk about sort of coordinating. You think we have difficulty coordinating across to you guys. We have difficulty coordinating among ourselves in our communication messages. And with the support and the support of the Undersecretary and his team, we've really begun to do a lot more coordinated messaging, interesting messaging around our university portfolio in particular. Partly, I suspect that's because he hails from the university side of the world himself, but also because I think it makes sense in the environment that we're in to do the best job we possibly can, and because our secretary has asked us to do the best job we possibly can about communicating research. As Undersecretary, Dr. Orr is the principal advisor to the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary on clean energy technologies, for example, and science and energy research initiatives. In fact, a lot of the conversation yesterday you heard about the budget just came right back to Dr. Orr to talk about the kinds of things that we have sitting in our portfolios and sitting in the kind of things that we're going to be communicating about and working to communicate forward. He has the following programs, so a number of you will see yourself in here: electricity delivery and energy reliability, energy efficiency and renewable energy, fossil energy, Indian energy policy and programs, nuclear energy, and science. Some 13 out of the 17 DOE national laboratories. Principally, the nuclear labs are not in there. He came to us from Stanford University, from the Precourt Institute, where he started at Stanford in 1985, I think that would have been, serving as the founding director of Precourt and founding director of the Stanford Global Climate and Energy Project, and is dean of the School of Earth Sciences. He's held a number of other research positions you can read about in the biography that's in the package you have in front of you. We're delighted he was able to come and talk with us just a little bit about his perspective from overseeing a wide range of programs here, not just the Office of Science, about the importance of communicating and the importance of communicating through the universities. Dr. Orr, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, now I have to say that I spent quite a bit of time yesterday afternoon in this room as we did the budget rollout. It was about 20 degrees colder in here then, which gave me the obvious opening for the usual joke about how the Department of Energy can't get the temperature right in our buildings. But it's warmer today. It might be too warm, but it was a pretty chilly effort yesterday. Actually, I'm glad to be able to have a chance to talk with you this afternoon. And I'd like to just start by saying that this communications area is something that my office has tried to pay attention to. And Seth Larson is here somewhere. There he is, right in front of me, of course. He's in my office and helps us think about all this. And of course, I learned some lessons in my university role about how we started a new organization, an Energy Institute, and it was pretty clear that we needed to do a much better job of communicating about that than we were doing at the time we started. And Mark Schwartz, sitting right back there, was a key addition to the staff that helped us do that. So I learned that it's important to be able to communicate. It's about building the support for the organization and its and helping people understand what we do. And that's what can make things be lots of fun. Now, so my job this afternoon is to welcome all of you, or maybe to say goodbye to all of you. I think I'm the only one standing between you and the bar, so I recognize that's a danger. But so the Office of Science, of course, is the biggest piece of the part of the department that I look after, and we're delighted to have Cherry Murray here with us. It took a long time to get through confirmations for lots of us. For me, it was a year, but as I got here, I quickly figured out that there was a lot more to do than there was time for any of us to do it, and having the confirmed folks in place has really made a difference for us. So, of course, that the Office of Science in particular works very closely with researchers in academic settings and at the national labs. And Rick mentioned that I'm a recovering academic, so I have some idea of what all that's about. And I think the kind of the best thing for this year I've had in office is this mandate to stick my nose into the broadest possible range of science and energy research. It really has been quite fun. Now I know that you've spent the day talking about the partnership between science and science communication. So I thought I'd just spend a few minutes and talk a little bit about the kind of broader aspects of this for our part of the agency. I'll just say a word here at the beginning about the kind of the state of play for science and energy. It's a really exciting time. And then I'll talk a little bit about our experience in trying to figure out ways to do this better for our part. And then I have a little special something to do at the end. So I think we will look back on this time as one where we really managed a huge acceleration of the transition in our energy mix that has to take place in this century, has to take place in the first half of this century. So if you look back over the last few years, the just a few examples, the price of the LEDs has come down by 90% in the last 5 or 6 years. Utility scale solar by something like 50%. Residential scale rooftop solar by 40%. Wind, big reductions in price there. So those technologies have really started to move into the marketplace. Last year, wind was up to 4.5% of the electricity generated, solar just about 1%. Still growing rapidly. So we're really making a transition into the clean energy world that is something that we need to do and something for which we need every bit of science and engineering that we can put to work. It's also been a time of huge progress in our ability to understand the world around us. The user facilities that are available now give us unprecedented access at very small spatial scales, at short time scales that allow us to understand the fundamentals of how atoms and molecules and subatomic particles interact. And of course, those all have huge applications. New materials to make better solar cells and to make batteries last longer and be less expensive. Modeling the latest climate data and understanding why there's a drought in California and the role of temperatures in the Pacific and the jet stream's location. Our ability to really assemble, to do materials by design. In a world where we all drive our electric vehicles, or maybe they're autonomous electric vehicles that we summon with our app that I don't know if it will still be called Uber or not, but you can imagine that well, it does make you wonder whether we'll all decide we don't actually need to own a car, which that would really change the world, wouldn't it? But in any case, a fundamental piece of that is a catalyst. Catalysts are part of every chemical reaction in industry. They're part of batteries. They're part of fuel cells, and of course we frequently use precious metals, platinum group metals for catalysts. But if we're really going to do this at a really large scale, we need to have earth-abundant materials that don't cost as much and that can be used sparingly. And so catalysts by design, the day when I can order up a catalyst and say what I want it to do, and the quantum computation folks can say, oh, well, what you need is this much of that with a smidgen of this, and at the right nano-sized particle, then we'll really be in business. So there's lots of exciting stuff, but of course there's a lot more to do. And one indication of that is something that's come to be called mission innovation. So last November, just before the Paris negotiation, President Obama and 19 other leaders of countries announced that they were banding together to seek to double the support for energy R&D in their national efforts. And this was accompanied by a parallel investment by a group of investors led by Bill Gates that is talking about putting up lots of patient capital money for investment in early stage energy technologies. So another piece of evidence in my claim that we're entering a period of fast energy R&D and fast changes in the energy system. And yesterday, when in our budget rollout, we talked about the first step along this was doubling over a 5-year period. So if you just do straight line doubling, that's 20% per year. If you're willing to engage in compound interest, it's only 15% a year. But in any case, for us, this made a big difference. Of the $7.5 billion proposed across the federal agencies, all 12 of them, $5.9 billion of the mission innovation effort is in this agency. So we're an important player in this, and we'll use it to accelerate clean energy innovation and to address climate change and to provide affordable clean energy to consumers and to create commercial opportunities, but also to try to lead the world in the huge transitions that are going to take place. There are going to be a lot of jobs, trillions of dollars of investment, and we should be leading the way in all of that. But it won't be enough just to do the research. Of course, we'll have to help people understand why we need to do that, and then we have to help them understand why something like the government effort should pay for that. So communicating with stakeholders is an essential component of being able to both to assemble the support it takes and then to deliver on the results. And of course, there are lots of audiences for this. I think our public is an essential audience. If they can understand why we need to do this, then we can do what we need to do. There are some specific audiences, like the one on Capitol Hill, that also, of course, matter. But they listen to their constituents, and they hear what people say when there's exciting work to be done. So at least a part of what we do is aimed at letting the world know what we're up to. Now, it might be a funding opportunity announcement, funding selections, it could be funding for a new research tool or some big upgrade at a national laboratory, could be a groundbreaking, could be some important scientific result, or perhaps even a new partnership with a university. So we've tried to do some of these things, and in a minute I'm just going to give you an example of one that I participated on in shortly after I arrived here. But we really are trying to work across the board: science, nuclear energy, fossil energy, renewables, energy efficiency, electricity delivery, and so on. To talk a little bit about the successes, because it helps us make the case for continued support. And part of this is reaching regional media. And I think in lots of ways all of you are probably better at that than we are here at headquarters, but we obviously need to work together to do that. Most Americans get their news from local newspapers and TV stations or radio stations, and so those are outlets that might be likely to talk about a new partnership or a new facility that benefits the community. And then, of course, Washington might hear about this too, and so that's a good thing. So if you're doing exciting work, or we here are funding a project that you're proud of, let's make sure we're telling that story. Now, for us, that means that sometimes that means that they send some poor guy like me out to talk. And it might be a site visit or a tour, or we'll often put in a press conference or at least an interview of some sort in a local outlet. It might just be a 15-minute press phone call. I've done actually a number of those in the car going back to the airport, but it helps. To the extent that you can help us connect the threads that link science to everyday life, that really is a help. So we're, I mean, I guess really what I'm doing is asking for your help in amplifying what we do together, because it helps us make that case. So I'll just close this with an example. And maybe some of you here were involved in this. This was the Coral announcement just about a year ago. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, Coral stands for the collaboration of Oak Ridge, Argonne, and Lawrence Livermore. And it's an initiative that puts $525 million to build a state-of-the-art supercomputer at each of the laboratories involved. And when we were getting ready to announce this in the fall of 2015, the Secretary asked the Department's Public Affairs and Communications teams to make a splash in the meeting with the strategic partners. So the Secretary himself held a briefing on the Hill and visited Oak Ridge along with Senator Alexander, who's our lead appropriator, to announce the initiative. Then in April, when the computer at Argonne was ready to be announced, I went to Chicago to participate, even though technically the announcement of the money had already been made several months prior, but there was an opportunity to do it there. The local congressional representatives turned up. We had a very nice little event, and one of the press guys asked, and just after I spoke, he said, "Well, you know, what sort of science would actually use a computer like this?" And I said, "All of it." And then between us, Peter Littlewood, who was the lab director, and I, and the guy at the lab who was heading up the program, rattled off 10 examples of cool things that we could do with truly high-performance computing in a way that we couldn't do as well before. And by the end of it, he was sort of nodding, you know, going, "Oh yeah, there might be something to this." So anyhow, this made lots of local press, and so I think that part was good, and I think it paid off. As I said, we did a press conference in local press, and then we did a national press call with a bunch of outlets around the country, so it gave new life to this story, and we really got dozens of stories published from the press conferences and so on that highlighted the cutting edge research as well as the benefits that it would have for users around Chicago. We of course now have strong support for Coral on the Hill, including from the delegations who participated in the announcement. So following the reasoning that says that event B followed event A, it must be that the communications caused all the strong support that we have in Congress. Well, maybe I can't claim scientifically that much causality, but I do actually think that it's an important component of what we do. And of course, the university folks. Mark, do you still put together every little while, maybe it's once a month, the Precourt newsletter on energy stuff that still comes to mind?
Don't you read it?
I do read it, actually. Even though I'm recused from anything that has to do with that university that I'm not even allowed to talk about, I do actually read it with interest. So I know how important the communicating about the results that you have, especially those with DOE support, is to all of us. So thanks for your effort there. I'll wrap up by saying that I hope you'll continue to foster relationships with your communications counterparts around the room here, of course, and beyond. And of course, we're open to advice on how to do this, and particularly open to suggestions for when we might do some things together. The Science and Energy Enterprise here counts on all of you to help us do our jobs. And as I said, I think this is such an exciting time that we really need to be helping people understand how cool it is to be participating in all of that. So thanks again for all that help. And if I'm, I know pointed out that I was standing between you and the bar, but I'm happy to answer a question or two if you have some. If not, I have another assignment here, so if you want to ask a question.
So you have time for maybe 2 questions? If anyone has them? I can count on it. Walk around here and get the other mic.
It's only here.
So, I'm Brian Burkett. This is more difficult for me.
You laughed at me because I
I've been making fun of you, Chris, all day. I'll just try and speak loudly. Yesterday, at the budget briefing, the secretary essentially identified that the plus up in the budget for the department was about $2.9 billion.
Yeah.
And the way I read the document, I haven't been able to study it, but 2.8 of that $1 billion goes in your pocket, at least one of your pockets. You've been a scientist for a long time, and now you're kind of calling the shots, as it were. Can you say a word about how that feels personally, additional responsibility, really great? Can you say a few words about you personally?
So, when I was a department chairman at a university, I thought that really life, it would be a lot better if the dean would use that pile of money sitting in his office to help my department. Well, then I got to be that dean, and I discovered that the pot of money that was really unrestricted, that the dean got to decide what to do, was really pretty tiny. This job is another version of that, in the sense that there's I'm partly teasing, but we have a complicated process by which we assemble our version of the budget. It then goes off to OMB, and they do their magic. What comes then, there's a complicated negotiation about what we don't agree with and what it ends up, and then it goes up to Capitol Hill. And I think it's fair to say that there is not a one-to-one mapping between the budget that passes the Congress and what happens here. So the part that we do, it's definitely a team effort. This is put together in a way that relies on the incredible strength of the people around me. It's pretty clear. In fact, when I first was considering whether I would work on this job, I said, well, heck, I'm not qualified. I know the energy transformation stuff pretty well, but I did serve on BSAC for a while, so I kind of know what they do. But there were a lot of aspects of the job that I didn't think I do as well as I needed to, and that's still true. But it's fun to learn. But it also and I also have learned to try to rely on the people around me who have the deep expertise it takes to do that, and that's made me respect the talent, the hard work. And all the dedicated people here who make this science enterprise possible, and that's been a good thing to learn as well. So it's been fun.
Thank you very much. With no other questions, I think you have one.
I do have another important task here. And this is in the spirit of recognizing best practices in communications. And I just want to call your attention to another great example of effective communication about DOE science and technology, DOE Pulse. Now, DOE Pulse was a bi-weekly, one-stop shop to read about the research being done at the national labs, including university research. It was originally intended, I understand, as a cheat sheet for Secretary Hazel O'Leary when visiting on Capitol Hill or with other policymakers to answer the question, what are the labs working on? But of course, it turned out to have much wider distribution, and for almost 20 years, every 2 weeks, DOE Pulse has answered that question with timely and compelling news about scientific breakthroughs at the DOE National Labs. And the last print issue of Pulse was issued in December, But now it's graduating to serve as a model for the new portal focusing on the labs on DOE's website. So we're transitioning to do it that way. For its entire lifespan, DOE Pulse has had one editor, Bill Cabbage at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And if he would join me here. For his deft editorial skills and leadership over 2 decades, I am pleased to recognize Bill Cabbage for his distinguished tenure as editor of DOE Pulse. Retaliate. So.
Well, I would say one word. I took Pulse on after Joe Culver and Rick created it in 1998. I had to do it for 6 months. And we got a system going, but I think it was Casey Stengel who said I couldn't have done it without the players. Every lab participated, and frankly, I never had a problem getting an issue out because of the participation of labs, and I really appreciate that. I think it paid dividends. I'm really excited. Pat Adams' energy he's putting into the blog with the same contributors.
PA headquarters, Pat Adams.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, and thank you all for helping us unpack some of these thorny issues today. I promised the undersecretary and our director and my boss follow-ups on the kind of conversations we've had today. And I expect to hear many of you talking about the conversations we started here in this room over the course of AAAS the next couple of days. Safe travels back to wherever you come from, and I hope to see you at AAAS tomorrow and going forward.
Thank you, Rick.